Hello and welcome, I'm your Codemaki. Here's a simple tutorial on how to make a virtual cursor which acts like a mouse, but you can drive it using a Gamepad controller. This is something that I need to make for my own game, Dinky Guardians. By the way, you can go pick it up on Steam. Here's the game, and as you can see, I can control the character, I can move it around with my controller. And then as I inspect any building like this grabbing machine, there you go, now I've got a nice dot, so I can control the mouse using my controller. I can click on any of these and everything works perfectly. I can do any kind of interaction, just like I can if I move the mouse. And there you go, now I'm using the mouse and everything works. And now I swap out the controller and everything works perfectly. So let's see how we can build a nice cursor that we control either with the mouse itself or with a gamepad controller. Also, if you're looking for a guided step-by-step path instead of individual tutorials, then check out my complete courses. Start off with my free course aimed at complete beginners, which won't teach you a ton. Then watch the follow-up free multiplayer course. After that, if you want something more advanced, then check out my turn-based strategy course. That one involves the making of a relatively complex game, and of course, the entire thing has a heavy focus on writing good clean code with a good project structure. Or in general, for any Unity developer, check out my Ultimate Unity Overview course, which has over 16 lectures, each covering a different tool or feature of the engine that you might not know about. Check them all out with the link in the description. Okay, so there are two ways you can implement gamepad menu logic in your game. One is using the regular built-in gamepad navigation. This one lets you define which button is selected and how to change the selection based on gamepad input. If you just have some simple buttons, like for example just a main menu where all the buttons are organized vertically, then for that the navigation system would work just fine. But if you have some more complex interfaces, like for example in my game, which is an automation game, so some of the UI is quite complex, for those use cases, having a virtual cursor is potentially a much better option. Now, I was actually going to build this myself from scratch when I thought to search and see if the input system already has it. And yep, it turns out that it does. Although there are some really tricky things to get it working properly, which took me quite a while to figure out, so hopefully this video is helpful. If you encounter some strange behavior, make sure you watch the video to the end. I will try to cover all the strange issues that I encountered and how I solved them. So first, you should be using the input system. If not, if you've never used it, then go watch my tutorial on it. By the way, over here on the package manager, if you go under samples and you scroll down, you can see the gamepad mouse cursor. So if you want, you can download their official sample and look at it. Then once you have the input system set up, over here I've got my basic player input actions controller. It's really just a super basic, super bare bones setup. So there's nothing in here that is specific to the virtual mouse just yet. Then in my hierarchy, I've got my canvas. So here it is, I have it set up like this. So it's in screen space overlay mode. Then for the canvas scaler, over here it is scale with screen size. For the reference resolution, I like to put it 1920 by 1080. Then match with width or height, and over here set the height to 1, and reference pixels of 100. So this is how I always set up my UI, pretty basic. Now let's make a new game object inside the UI. So over here, let's create an empty game object, call it the virtual mouse UI. And now this part is extremely important. On the rect transform, make sure you anchor this one over here on the lower left corner. Make sure it is anchored onto this one, and then put 0 on everything. So 0 on position X, Y, Z, and also width and height, also both at 0. Again, this is very important. If you leave it anchored on the center, you will get some weird results. Also very important is make sure that this object is a direct child of the canvas. If you make it a child of another game object that does not have the same size, the same setup as the canvas, if you do that, it will not match, and again, you will find some weird issues. So make sure this one is set up exactly like this, and make sure it is a direct child of your canvas. Okay, so now for the visual, technically you can just go into add component over here, add an image directly. But personally, I like to keep things organized and separated, so I'm going to create a child UI image game object. I'm going to call this the mouse visual, and then for the sprite, in my project files I've got a simple circle sprite. It is literally just a circle texture, so there it is. I'm going to move it over here just so it's a bit more visible, although the position does not really matter. What does matter is the size. This is obviously way too big for a controller, so let's go with something like 2020. So just a nice little dot. And in order to make sure that the dot does not become invisible, just in case our background is white, let's add a simple built-in outline. So the outline component, let's put it on 2 by 2 and put it on black with full alpha. Okay, so that's our basic visual. And now another extremely important thing, which is over here on the image, under raycast target, make sure this one is not toggled. This is very important. If you leave this toggled, basically the virtual mouse will be hitting this image and it will not interact with whatever button is behind it. So again, extremely important, make sure this raycast target is disabled. And same thing on the parent, make sure the anchors are set up correctly like this, make sure width and height is 0. And on this one, make sure the anchor is over there on the middle and with whatever width and height you want. Again, I'm repeating this several times because if you make one tiny mistake, then everything will look very strange and you will be very confused, just like it happened to me. Okay, so now let's go into the virtual mouse UI game object, and over here let's add a component, and let's search for the virtual mouse. This is a built-in component from the input system. Here it is, the virtual mouse input. And now let's begin by dragging the actual visual reference. So the mouse visual, drag this one. Again, drag this one, not the container. So the underlying mouse visual, drag it for both the cursor graphic and the cursor transform. Then over here on cursor mode, go ahead and leave it as software because we want to control this image and not control the actual mouse hardware cursor. Then for the speed, let's put it a little bit faster. So let's put it at 1000. Scroll speed, let's leave it like that. And then down here we have the various actions. So you have pretty much every action that you would have on a mouse. The most important ones are obviously the stick action in order to move our cursor and the left button in order to essentially fake a click. Now for defining these actions, we have two options. We can either add the action directly over here. So let's click on the plus icon here and let's add a binding. And now I have my Xbox One controller enabled. So I'm going to double click this binding and over here on path, let's click on it. Let's listen to input and I'm going to assign the left stick on the gamepad. Okay, so I'm going to use the left stick in order to basically move the virtual cursor. Then for the left mouse button, again, let's click on plus, let's add a binding and double click and let's go into the path, let's listen, and I'm going to put it on the A. So let's go button south on the gamepad. So this would be A on an Xbox controller, or for example, on a PlayStation controller, this would be the cross and so on. Okay, so that's how it is. But like I said, you can either add the action directly or you can use a reference. Now, if you click on reference, then basically you get this field. And if you assign this field, then basically you can assign any action that you define in any player input actions. So for the input actions over here, all of the actions that you got here, all of these various actions, you can use them as reference in that one. So for example, in here, instead of binding directly to the left stick, you could bind directly to this action. The benefit of that one would be if you rebind this action, then you wouldn't need to update over here the virtual mouse, since it would always go through this action. But to keep it simple, for this example, I'm going to use directly instead of using references. I'm actually going to talk about this in a little bit because there was a sneaky issue over here that tripped me up, but for now, let's keep it just like this. So just with this, if we test, okay, here I am, the game is playing, and if I move my gamepad stick, and there you go, it does indeed move the virtual cursor. All right, awesome, so far so good. Now again, if your cursor is not moving correctly, again, go back and double check your anchors. Here is how my canvas is set up, here is how the virtual mouse UI is set up, and inside the mouse visual. With all of this, we have everything working, except now if I make a button, so I'm going to go inside the canvas, create a new UI object, let's make it a button, and let's make it quite a bit bigger, so something like this. Then just for testing, let's modify over here the highlighted color, so this is the color when the mouse is on top, so let's put this on a green just so it's nice and visible. By the way, also remember how the sorting works in the UI. Basically, the sorting order is based on the order in the hierarchy, and things below in the hierarchy will actually render on top. So since we want the virtual mouse UI to render on top, let's make sure to drag this one to the bottom of the hierarchy so that it's above the button. Okay, so with this, let's test. Okay, here I am, and I can move, and if I go above the button, and nope, it is not working. The button is not changing color. If I use the regular mouse and I go above, yep, you can see it does recognize, but the cursor, the one by the gamepad, nope, this one does not work. So this is one of the main tricky issues that I encountered. Thankfully, this one has a simple fix. The fix is actually on the hierarchy. Let's go in the event system. And yep, over here you do see a nice warning message. Basically, it's telling you should be using a different event system for the input module. Thankfully, it's super simple. Literally just click on this button, and there you go, it replaces with a different component. Also, before we test, one very important thing here, which is on the game view over here, make sure you are under Full HD. This is very important, make sure it's Full HD and not 16:9 or any other, it needs to be Full HD. And on the canvas scaler over here, make sure it is also 1080p. So it needs to be 1080p both up here and down here. I'll cover why this is extremely important in a bit, and in the end of the video I'll cover the solution to the problem, but for now just make sure you have it set up exactly like this. And now if we test again, and now I move, and yep, now it does work. If on your end it doesn't work, then make sure you have Full HD 1080p selected over here on the game view. And also on the canvas, same thing, canvas scaler, make sure it is full 1080p. Like this, it is working. However, if I were to swap this out to 16:9, note how over there the canvas scale, that one is now at 0.4 instead of 1, it is under 1. So the canvas is basically scaled, and now if I try moving the button over, it does not work, but for some reason it works when I go into this corner. So that's a really strange issue that took me a lot of time to debug. It has to do with the canvas scale. I'll cover the solution a little bit after I cover some more potential problems. But right now, as long as you set it up here as Full HD, everything should work. So I can move the cursor, and yep, it does work. Although in your case, maybe it won't work. I'm saying that because when I tested in my game, actually for some reason this did not work. Now in this case it works, so that's great. But just in case it doesn't work for you like it didn't work for me, let me go over what I did to fix it. I believe the issue may have been because I was already controlling the player with a player input actions, whereas over here I really just have an empty project. So basically when we click on that button, it swapped out to this component. And over here on this component, you can see it used the default input actions asset. So this is the one that is down here inside the actual packages. So this is the default one. Now, just in case you have issues, here's what I did. Basically, I just went into the, over here, this default input actions. So the one inside the package, I just open up this one. Then I just grab the UI action map. So just right click and let's copy this one. Okay, close. And now up here, I went into my own player input actions, which again, I only had the player action map. So then over here, right click and paste, and there you go. Now we have the UI input actions. Then I also went here onto the point action, and for this one, I added a new binding. And for the path, I found the virtual mouse. And yep, I had this one, the position for the virtual mouse. Same thing over here on the click, add a new binding, go and search for virtual mouse, and for the left button on the virtual mouse. So just this, and then save asset. And then on the hierarchy, back into the event system, back into this component, instead of using the default input actions, let's assign the player input actions. And just like that, since we copied the action map, everything should already be automatically matched. So it should be using the UI point and so on, so all of these should be matched exactly perfectly. And now here, if I move the controller cursor, and yep, there you go, it does work. I go above, and it does indeed turn green. Now again, if you have issues on this one, the main thing is on the mouse visual, make sure raycast target is disabled. If I enable this one and now I try moving above it, nope, you can see it does not change. That is because basically the virtual cursor is hitting this image instead of hitting the button behind it. So if this is the case, make sure the visual has raycast target disabled, and make sure there are no more visuals over here under the virtual mouse UI. Make sure there are no more images, nothing else that can basically block the virtual mouse. And if you do that, then yep, you should see this working. So over here it works with the virtual cursor and it works with the regular cursor. Okay, so really that's pretty much it, but let me cover some more potentially sneaky issues. Now there's one that is really very strange, and it's actually on the virtual mouse component. As you can see down here, we assign the actions directly, so just the move and the click action. And as you saw in the editor, this works perfectly, there are no errors, nothing, no problem. However, if you make a build just like this, you will get a ton of errors. And not just errors, but actually crashes as well. Now when I made the build just like this for the Steam Deck for my game, it completely broke everything because it was triggering non-stop errors. So basically the build would run on the Steam Deck and then immediately crash just because way too many errors. And the error itself was some really strange argument exception. Now this one took me a real long time to figure out the cause, and it turns out the cause is because all of these actions are not assigned. Apparently some of the backend code for the input system, apparently that one assumes that these fields are always assigned. For some reason, that logic runs differently in a build than in the editor, so here in the editor there's no problem, but apparently in a build it assumes these are always assigned. So in order to prevent that error, just make sure that you assign all of them. So for example, use the reference, and then just drag all the references. So inside my player input action, for example, for the middle click, I'm just going to drag the same one. Again, even if I don't use them, because for example, in my own game, I never use middle clicks or right clicks, but just go ahead and assign them just so they don't have that strange error. Okay, so this should solve that strange issue. Now the next issue is potential conflicts with the menu navigation. Like I said in the beginning, there are two ways to handle menu controller support. It's either with a virtual cursor or the navigation system. If you don't even know what it is, you can basically look at any button. Let me actually just take this button and duplicate it and put another button over here off to the side. Now if you look inside the button component, over here you see something called navigation, and by default this will be set to automatic. And then you've got this button saying visualize, and if you click on it and you look on the scene view, you can see a bunch of arrows. So you can see there's one arrow coming from this button onto this one, another one from this one onto this one. So basically what that means is if you have this button selected and you move to the left, then it's going to select this button. And if you have this one selected, move to the right and select this one. Now in order to easily visualize this, let's select both buttons. And over here on the selected color, let's put something more visible. So let's say a nice blue. Okay, so now let's test this. Now here I'm going to use a little trick in order to select the button. So basically I'm going to left click inside this button and then I'm going to release it outside the button just so I don't trigger a click. And just like this, yep, this one is now selected. And now with this button selected and the navigation enabled, now if on my gamepad stick I move to the right, yep, there you go, it selected this button. And I move left and there you go, selects that one. So that's how it works, that's how the automatic navigation system works. Except of course, if you have both this system and the virtual cursor, obviously you've got some conflicts between the both of them. So really you should pick just one or the other, assuming that you want to use just the virtual mouse and disable the automatic navigation. For that, you can either select the button and down here under navigation just set it to none. That's one option. However, obviously it's quite tricky if you have tons and tons of individual buttons. Having to go and set this to none for all of them, that's quite tricky. So a better method is to just ignore that and then just go into the event system. And over here we can see the action for move. This is the action that actually moves which button is selected. So for this one we can simply swap from navigate and go into none. So basically we're going to have no input in order to trigger the navigation menu. And with this, now if we are, and again, let me click, hold, and release outside. So that one is selected, and now I move right on the stick, and there you go, it no longer selects that one. So the navigation menu is no longer working, and I can now just go up here, click onto that one, and I click onto that one, and so on, and everything works. Next, we have one more issue, and that is the gamepad going off screen. Now this is a bit of a strange one, because it seems like something that the input system should really have by default, but apparently it doesn't. So here I've got the game running and I've got side by side my scene view. So there's my cursor and if I move it on to the left and I keep moving and there you go, now my cursor was way off screen. And now if I was a player and I was only seeing this and now I move the gamepad to the right, there you go, I can't see where's my cursor, why is my cursor invisible? That is because it is way off screen. Obviously you don't want this. You don't want the cursor to ever leave the game screen. Now fixing this was actually quite a bit tricky. It's another thing that took me quite a while to figure out. We're going to need a script to do this, so let's do that. Let's go ahead and create a new C# script. Let's call it the virtual mouse UI. Let's select the virtual mouse UI and attach the script. Okay, like this, and let's open. Over here, let's remove the regular code and let's write a simple private void late update. We want it on late update just because we want to run this at the very end of the frame after the input system has done its movement. And now here, basically, we just need to clamp the mouse position and we move it. So first, let's actually grab the virtual mouse. So let's go up here, make a private, make it of type virtual mouse input, which again, this one exists inside using Unity engine.inputsystem.ui. So if your Visual Studio doesn't add it automatically, make sure you add this line. So this is going to be our virtual mouse input. So that is that component that we saw. So let's grab it. So we can just grab it over here on an awake. Let's see, we get component of our virtual mouse input. And now that we have this over here on our late update, we can go into this one. And first we need to grab the current position. So inside the virtual mouse input, let's grab the actual virtual mouse. So this is the actual mouse that that component drives. And we can grab the position. This one is a vector2 control. So let's grab the value, which is the actual underlying vector2. So let's grab the vector2 for the virtual mouse position. Okay, so we have this. And obviously we just need to clamp this within the valid values. So let's simply validate first the X. So we can use mathf.clamp. Clamp, just in case you don't know, this one takes a certain value and make sure it is within a minimum and a maximum. So that's exactly what we want. So let's clamp the virtual mouse position.x. And for the minimum, let's put a minimum of 0. And for the maximum, let's use screen.width. So there you go. That makes sure that the virtual mouse position never leaves the screen. And let's do the exact same thing for the Y, but for the Y, we're going to clamp it to the height. So that's the Y and that's the Y. Also, by the way, if you wanted to add some kind of border, just make sure it doesn't really reach the edge. You could just add it here, just some simple math. So then when this position is clamped, when this position is now validated, then we can use the class input state, which again, this one exists inside Unity Engine input system low level. So make sure you add that. And then we can call the function change. And then this one takes a certain device. So for the device, let's go into the virtual mouse input. Inside the virtual mouse input, let's grab the virtual mouse, and we're going to want to modify the position for that virtual mouse. And the position is going to be the new one that we saw. So the virtual mouse position. Okay, so that's it. Basically, we grab the position, we clamp it within the valid values, and then we set it again. So let's test. Okay, so here we are. And if I move all the way over to the left, and nope, it no longer leaves the screen. And I go up, nope, does not leave. Go down, nope, does not leave. Go to the right, and nope, does not leave. So now the cursor is always inside the screen. Okay, great. Now the next bug is the one that we saw a while ago. So if up here is set as full HD and the scale of the canvas is 1, if I do that, then yep, it works. Look at that, I'm mousing over the buttons exactly as I should be. But if I now swap this out for 16:9, and now I try to pass the cursor over there, nope, does not work. And for some reason, if I go, let's say over here, and there you go, the button is somehow, for some reason, all the way over here. This is really strange. This is another issue that drove me insane for quite some time. How the cursor is not on the actual cursor position. So hopefully this video helps prevent you from going insane just like I did. The problem has to do with scaling. If the canvas is not scaled, which happens if I set this one to fully G, like this, there's no scaling, and yep, everything works. But for some reason, if there is scaling of any kind, so over here it's at 0.4, and now for some reason it appears that the cursor itself, that one is also being scaled. So this strange position just so happens to be that one is at 0.4, so this one is about 40% of the actual position, the difference from here to here. Thankfully, the solution is pretty simple. Here in our virtual mouse UI class, let's just add a field. Let's make it a serialized field. Make it a rect transform for the canvas rect transform. Then here in the editor, let's drag the reference of the canvas itself. Okay, there it is. And now we basically just need to do some math to correct it. So for that, let's do it on a regular update. So on update, let's grab the transform.local scale. So that's the scale of the virtual mouse. And for this one, we're going to basically make it the inverse of the canvas rect transform. So we can invert it, just do 1f divided by the canvas rect transform. Let's grab the local scale. And since all of them are exactly the same, the x, y, and z, let's just grab the x. But of course, this is just a regular float. So to convert this float into a vector 3, let's just multiply it by vector3.1. Also, by the way, since you're here, just another quick tip. If you want to make sure that the cursor is always on top, you can use transform.set as last sibling. And this will basically always move it to the end of the hierarchy, thus making sure that the virtual cursor is always on top. Okay, so this should pretty much fix that issue. Basically, we're going to scale this virtual mouse up or down depending on the scaling of the canvas, which should put it on the correct position. Let's see. So here, and first let's verify, okay, with fully G, with no scaling on the canvas itself. So over here, no scaling. And as I move, and yep, this one works, and that button's over there. Okay, works. Now let's scale it. And now there's my cursor. And as I move over that one, yep, it works, and move over that one, and yep, it also works. So now like this, even if the canvas is scaled, you can see that the cursor is now in the correct position. So if I put the cursor visually over there, over that button, then yep, it does trigger that button. Now, of course, then as we scale the virtual cursor, this game object, you can see that the visual is scaled upwards. So again, if you want to counteract that, you could do another basic math. So you could just go inside the actual mouse visual. And over here on this one, let's say put this one on 0.4 to match that one. And yep, now we have the exact same size cursor. But the important thing is just by doing that math, now the cursor is visually exactly where it should be. So then another thing is how to detect mouse versus gamepad. So for that, I'm going to showcase code from my game. In my game, I can seamlessly swap between mouse and gamepad controls. Note how the virtual cursor only shows up when I actually touch the gamepad. So here's the code for how I identify which input is active in my game. I've got a general game input class that does lots of things regarding input. But the important thing for identifying that one is I simply have an enum, so just a game device. So it can either be the keyboard and mouse or the gamepad. And then I simply got a field for the active game device. Then down here on the awake, inside the awake, I subscribe to this event, this callback, the onActionChange inside the input system. This one is going to get triggered pretty much anytime the player touches any input. So that is going to call this function over here. And then on this function, this one takes 2 arguments, and one of them is input_action_change. So here I'm basically just testing the actual phase for the action. If it is an action performed, if it's not, then I'm just going to ignore it. So if it is an action performed, then I'm basically going to ignore if it is a virtual mouse, because again, I'm only trying to test between the gamepad and the actual mouse. So if it is a virtual mouse and I don't care about it, I'm going to ignore it. If it isn't a virtual mouse, then I'm going to check if the input action control device, if it is of type gamepad. So if it is an Xbox controller or a PlayStation or Switch or anything. If it is a gamepad, then I'm basically going to change the active device to gamepad. And if it is not, then I'm going to say that the keyboard and mouse is active. Then this function over here, this one just sets the active game device. Then I also either show or disable the regular cursor based on whether the keyboard and mouse is enabled or not. And then I'm going to fire off this event on game device changed. And then I have this other script, which is pretty much exactly the same thing that we saw, the virtual cursor UI script. And then on this one over here on start, I'm listening to that event on game device changes. And when that changes over here, I'm really just updating the visibility. And I'm really just checking the game input instance. If the gamepad is the one that is active, then I'm going to show it. If not, then I'm going to hide it. And that literally just enables or disables this game object. So yep, this is how I handle swapping between mouse and gamepad in my game. Also, one more note, instead of using the built-in component, you can actually just build it yourself manually from scratch. If you want to learn how to do that, I suggest you look at Sam Yam's excellent tutorial on it. She covers how to create the underlying input object and how to manually move it. Okay, so the virtual cursor is fully working, and here is the exact same thing in my game. So I can inspect any buildings. Once in here, I am controlling the character just as usual. And as I inspect the building, yep, I've got my virtual mouse cursor, and I can move around. I can fake click to select anything, and I can do pretty much anything that I can do with a mouse. This is actually a big part of the reason why it was so easy to make my game playable on a Steam Deck. I just need the regular controller to control my character, and then as I inspect any of these buildings, I just need the virtual cursor controller just like I would with a mouse. With all this, and yep, the entire game, everything works perfectly with a controller. If you like games with automation, colony building, and defense mechanics, then check out Dinky Guardians on Steam. Alright, hope that's useful. Check out these videos to learn some more. Thanks to these awesome Patreon supporters for making these videos possible. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.